Now, the British Foreign Secretary William Hague made a startling claim this afternoon. He said that what's happening in North Africa and the Middle East would likely be more historically significant than either the financial crisis or the September 11 bombings. He claimed the demand for freedom was universal and governments which tried to resist it were doomed to fail. In a masterstroke of timetabling, a few hours later, the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia emerged from a meeting with David Cameron to say how very much his government supported the UN resolution on Libya. Here's some of Mr. Hague's speech.
We're only in the early stages of what is happening in North Africa and the Middle East. These events are already set to overtake the 2008 financial crisis and 9/11 as the most important development of the early 21st century, and are likely to bring some degree of political change, I think, in all countries in the Arab world. It is a historic shift of massive importance, presenting the international community as a whole with an immense opportunity. We believe that the international response to these events must be commensurately generous, bold and ambitious.
Well, we're joined now by Rory Stewart, the MP and former Deputy Governor of part of Iraq, and also by the neoconservative author Douglas Murray. Now, is he right that this is bigger than 9/11, bigger than the financial crisis, what we're seeing here?
I think it's hugely big. It's very surprising. If you were betting, I guess, 3 months ago whether we'd be doing these kinds of interventions, whether this kind of stuff would be happening, the money would be against it. You'd think that after Iraq and Afghanistan, the end of a period of intervention had come. So I think this is a very startling event.
Do you think he's right?
He could be right, but it's a bit early to say. I mean, well, look, among other things, if after all of these revolutions, uprisings and so on, Gaddafi remained in power in Libya, the Saudis remained solidly in power there, the Iranian government was unchanged, and so on, then I think that this wouldn't have been a very important event. We've seen a revolution in Egypt and a couple of others, but unless the major totalitarian powers in the region change, this will not be the seismic event he thinks.
OK, so only history is going to determine whether he's right or wrong there. But what he seems to be indicating is a major redefinition of foreign policy priorities for this government. It was only a matter of weeks ago that David Cameron was talking about commerce, mercantilism being the basic driving force of British foreign policy from now on. Now they're talking about something completely different, aren't they?
Well, it's just mixed messages. It's being made up on the hoof. I mean, as you saw there, a couple of hours after talking about this, David Cameron sitting with the Saudi defence minister. The Saudis have been giving mercenaries to the Bahraini government to gun down the people of Bahrain. So there's no consistency here.
What did you make of those, the sight of the Saudi foreign minister being glad-handed in Downing Street immediately after that speech?
I think, Jeremy, the Prime Minister's on the right track. I think this is very difficult. This is diplomacy. This is the business of this game. I think we're seeing things move in the right direction, and what we don't want to do is get into a worldview which is so perfectionist that we can't deal with anyone.
Absolutely, but it is the complete antithesis of what William Hague was talking about. Repressive regimes, and are there many more repressive than the Saudi regime?
Jeremy, this is banal, but it's a marathon. We're looking at 30 years, we're looking at a whole series of countries. We're trying to push things in the right direction. Things worked well in Central and Eastern Europe over the last 20 years. They've moved in the right direction in Latin America. We're hoping they're going to move in the right direction in the Middle East and North Africa. And we're dealing at the moment with Tunisia, with Egypt, with Libya. This is a very long game.
But at the moment, I mean, the Tunisian government fell, the Egyptian government fell, both broadly pro-Western, quite weak totalitarianisms. But the stronger powers, the powers that are willing to gun down the people in their own streets, the powers like Saudi that are willing to just round up and kill anyone who's likely to become a protester, if those governments don't change by the end of this, then this is a very minor event in which all that we've seen is that to remain in power in the Middle East, you just have to be a brutal dictator. If you're a weak one, you go. But if you're brutal, you stay. And if that was the lesson after this era, then it's an extremely dangerous one.
What are the implications? I mean, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that William Hague is right and that there is some really big change going on which will require of all of us a reappraisal of how we view the world. What is this country's foreign policy going to look like?
Well, it's going to have to be much, much better informed. We're going to need a lot of people, civilians in those countries, who speak the language as well, who are right in there. Because these movements happen very unpredictably. Generally, you can't predict, but you have to respond very quickly. And I'm worried that we've lost a lot of that infrastructure over the last 30 years. So if we're going to be serious about foreign policy, we have to invest in the Foreign Office.
Does it require us also to give logistical, perhaps even military support to those who are seeking these changes?
I think sometimes it does, but I think the most important thing is we're on a tightrope. You've got Srebrenica on the one hand, Bosnia and all the horror of that, and on the other hand you've got Iraq. And we've got to somehow find that very, very narrow path where we can show that we're on the side of progress, but we don't get ourselves mired in horror.
I have to say, the idea that we need more of the British Foreign Office seems to me to be saying we need more of what's been part of the problem. The British Foreign Office has been pumping an agenda of the last 30 years and more, which has been shown in recent weeks and months to be defunct. The Arab peoples don't want it. They don't want totalitarian dictators propped up by Western powers. They would like democracy. And if this government is on the wrong side of that change, as it has been in Bahrain, as it is in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, then I think that they're going to realize they're on the wrong side of history.
At a political level, it's also fascinating, isn't it? Because Cameron seems to be embodying rather the reverse of Obama's reluctance to get involved in Libya because he wants to concentrate upon domestic affairs. Cameron, who comes in saying he's going to sort out Britain because of the terrible mess it's been left in by the Labour government, suddenly has his attention entirely distracted by events in North Africa.
I think, in a sense, we're closer to North Africa than President Obama is. This is right on the other end of the Mediterranean. And I think it's also good that Europe is responding to this, rising. I just saw the Norwegian, Danish ambassadors today. It's very, very interesting. You would have thought that people have become immensely cynical, but in fact, the whole human rights movement's changed in 20 years. The way we respond to these things is going to be very, very different, and I think Cameron is sensing that.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed. Thanks.